Despite not having read a single word that Hitoma Uruma has written, I think I've been convinced with relative certainty that he's probably a pretty good writer. The English versions of his work that we have read, which are written by other people, based on his novels written in Japanese that we haven't read, give the impression that his novels are pretty good. Of course, the specific work we're here to discuss today is Adachi and Shimamura, but of what little else we've read of his work, mainly the first chapter of the Bloom Into You spin-off novels, there's a consistent focus on introspection and careful characterization and articulation through all sorts of details, both trivial and otherwise. The first pages of the Sayaka novels open with Sayaka describing her school curriculum and extracurricular activities, her awareness that she is a gifted student and that she's incredibly committed to being one, so much so that she rarely quits something. She is devoted, and this characterization informs the rest of the work quite readily, as Sayaka finds herself annoyed by another girl at her swim practice who, to her, appears not devoted. Devoted, perhaps, not to swimming, but to Sayaka herself. And then her first lesbianic encounter with that same girl results in panic, in her running away, in her quitting. Quitting for the first time she can remember, and her quiet surprise when her parents just accept that. All this is told to us in prose and monologue. It's delicate and psychological and intriguing, and it leaves us wanting to know more. And yet somehow, we read all this, were fascinated, and then our attention span burned down around it, and we forgot about it for a year or two. So yeah, that happened. And we also forgot about, until one day very recently, I, Audrey, decided to wrangle this mess of a brain and have us settle down to read it. Adachi and Shimamura. Most of y'all know Adachi and Shimamura for being an anime, and that's fair, I guess. It is an anime after all, but it's also an adaptation, as most anime are, and specifically an adaptation of a novel, or a series of novels, the first 4 of them at least. Those 4 novels are only the first act of the story. There's now 11, with at least 1 more planned, probably the final one, and we've read 8 of them, and I have opinions. So you're going to hear them, because someone has to, unless you don't want to. And then you can leave, I guess. We're fine with people leaving. Anyway, concerning the anime, we have some mild feelings about it. Our overall opinion is that it's good. It's a pretty good anime. It's a competent adaptation, and we don't really have a lot of complaints as to its quality in either of those respects. It's not a particularly lavish production, nowhere near as technically impressive as Bloom Into You, which is one notable example of probably about as close as you can get to a KyoAni level work without being from KyoAni, but it's pleasantly storyboarded, elegantly scored, and overall perfectly watchable. It's good enough to recommend as an entry point into the story, although the Moke manga is the far better adaptation, but woefully insufficient as a substitute for it, partially for the obvious snag that it ends before the relationship gets going, and there'll likely never be a second season.
That was kind of a letdown. We didn't get much closer, but we didn't move further apart.
But there's also some speed bumps that have somewhat unavoidably arisen from adapting the story to a visual medium. When the anime aired, the thing I remember most is people being confused as all heck why Shimamura was so dense. That is to say, blind. A blind blonde, an unnatural blonde at that, being blind to the obvious homosexual before herself, being extremely homosexual towards her in her presence, and drinking mineral water, which, as anyone who's seen the film Heathers knows, is a universal signifier of homosexuality. And well, you see, there is an answer to that. Shimamura is not blind whatsoever. She knows something is up with Adachi, and it's not as if she's not pretty nearly drawn the conclusion that Adachi is attracted to her, but she's just sort of averted her eyes from it. She's decided, albeit somewhat subconsciously, that thinking about Adachi being gay is troublesome. Answering the question of why Adachi wants to hold my hand, wants to be so close to me, and all that, isn't a path she'd like to take. And so she just willfully ignores it, subconsciously. Shimamura's gotten through life this way, by not thinking too hard about it, just going with the flow, letting everyone around her take her wherever, putting up a path of least resistance. She finds forming genuine, lasting connections with people difficult and doesn't really feel very strongly about most of her peers. But she also feels that she needs people anyway, so she masks through it, politely smiles, and lets her relationships just happen, come and go, like the waves. This does bother Shimamura, if for no other reason that she finds it tedious and tiresome, but she kind of rolls with it anyway. Meanwhile, Adachi is explicitly an introvert to the extreme, and not in the bocchi kind of way, or the even more bocchi kind of way, where she wants to make friends, but can't. No, Adachi straight up doesn't want friends. She finds friendships burdensome to the point of being soul-crushing. An anecdote in the novels has Adachi describing how, in elementary school, she made an honest attempt towards being more socially active, but found that each new friend she made felt like another chain on her soul. Eventually coming to accept that, at least in her view, she was not built for close relationships with other humans. To put it simply, it's not a skill issue. She just doesn't care for the grind. In middle school, she comes off towards her peers as an ice queen, and there's this really interesting chapter. The first chapter, in fact, in the fourth novel, where Adachi is described from the perspective of someone else. An unnamed fellow student with whom she is delegated to work the school library counter, who tries and fails to form a connection with her. And this student's description of Adachi is fascinating. Adachi is described as someone who, in step with her desire to eschew friends, is seen by the student body as seemingly unattainable, and this student is startled, then elated to have the opportunity to even sit near this person, but Adachi, unconscious and undesiring of her semi-celebrity status within the school, deflects all attempts to break her shell. And so there, this unnamed student stays looking, stays admiring. And then one day this girl, this unnamed student whom we will never hear of again, who has no significant characterization to speak of, no importance to this story other than to be a lens through which we see Adachi, happens to run into Adachi once again at the beginning of their high school second semester, and takes the opportunity to say, "Thank you," for something that Sakura Adachi didn't know she didn't see, couldn't feel, didn't realize. Something so incorporeal to her, so powerful to this one peer of hers, as having been allowed to be in proximity to her, to have a memory of her that none else can claim to have. And Adachi doesn't get it, and can't possibly have it explained, and it's just, that's it really. That's just that chapter. It was gut-wrenching to read because it tapped deeply into a specific desire that's been stuck within us for a long time, that we've previously found it really hard to articulate without sounding weird or creepy or wrong. The desire to know how we were seen, the impact we've made on people we crossed paths with, whose names we don't know, whose faces we've forgot, or whose lives just briefly overlapped with ours at one time or another, to know if they're okay, to know if they even remember us, or the person who we used to be, whoever that was, to To be able to affirm that those connections, however tenuous, were important, were valuable, and just like, yeah, I don't know if what I'm saying even makes any sense, but those many little encounters, those small moments that made us who we were, have left us conscious of dozens, if not hundreds, of possible branches in this life that could have butterfly affected us somewhere completely different from where we currently are, and we can't know and we can't say, but it's just that basic feeling of, I wonder how you're doing. I wonder how life could have been if we'd followed after you. I wonder if you think about me too. And that desire to achieve closure, something articulated, actualized, in this unnamed girl saying thank you and at the same time saying goodbye to another Sakura on the wind. These events are not adapted in the anime. They are not adapted in either of the manga adaptations. But there is such significance to this anecdote, such immense weight that is given to this random no-name and her view of Adachi, a story about Adachi to which Adachi herself was entirely oblivious. But then later, in one of the most pivotal moments of Adachi's character arc, when a shady fortune teller convinces her to do something about her friendship with Shimamura before they drift ever further away, and she remembers that girl. Every now and then, I thought back to this one time in junior high when I worked as a library assistant. There was this girl. I couldn't remember her name, or even what she looked like, but she asked me if I had any friends. At the time, I told her I didn't, and that I was fine with it. But looking back, I couldn't help but wonder why she asked me that. Was she going to offer to be my friend? Even then, my answer would have remained the same. I would have told her I didn't need any friends, but part of me regretted how that interaction played out. Part of me felt that we should have talked it out first, like actual human beings, instead of me one-sidedly slamming her with rejection. With that in mind, I didn't want to add to my list of regrets. I couldn't keep sticking my head in the sand. No, I was going to take action. And if I ended up regretting that, then so be it. And this is such a hugely emotional payoff. Adachi did remember. That girl did affect her life. Even despite Adachi's efforts to refuse connections, still, such a trivial interaction still made her who she is, still contributed to altering the course of her life, and that's just, gosh, this is so fucking cathartic to think about, Even if that person you remember, you wish you could have known, isn't thinking about you, barely remembers you, you still were there. You still did something for them. Even if it was just being there. Even if your feelings didn't reach them right then. Even if the fact that you crossed paths with them alone is significant. It's that affirmation of that fact that I see in this small, insignificant seeming novel-only plot beat, from which I feel so much meaning is exuded, and why it's a shame it was excluded. It may have seemed trivial, seemed unimportant, and seemingly that's why every adaptation adapted this out, but that triviality is precisely what is so important about it. I cannot exaggerate enough when I say that I feel something essential is lost by this piece of story being discluded from every other version. And that's really the curse of adapting Adashima in general. There are so many details of the character and story, so too numerous to list, that the prose takes time to explore and develop and clarify that would be too tedious to elaborate on in an anime or a manga, and are thus cut, and rightly so, for the sake of telling the story economically in those mediums. But what is lost as a result is the essential psychological depth of this narrative, and yes, it is a psychological narrative, a cerebral one even. Yes, it's true, Adachi and Shimamura is a calmer, gayer Kaguya-sama, and that's why Shimamura is so fucking dense, and why Adachi and Shimamura is so fucking dense. Once you've read deep enough into Adashima, there is absolutely no way around it. This is a deeply psychological conflict. The characters' mental states and attitudes, the things they won't say so much more in this story than anything else. Which is why I think, although the adaptations are pretty good, the Moke manga adaptation is actually really good. It does a much better job visually illustrating the psychological aspect of the story than the anime does. And I think if you're really allergic to prose, but really want to read Adashima, you should read the Moke version. It's not a perfect one-to-one recreation of the story. No adaptation ever is, but it's pretty damn up there. Nonetheless, the adaptations are still limited in how far they can go in elevating in their versions. And Adachi and Shimamura, the anime, is good. Just good. It's a competent slice-of-life anime and an incomplete romantic drama. And it's nice to have a visual companion to the story, but as a standalone piece of media, it's not all that much more. It doesn't get the time to develop things further, or to get to the things that make Adachi and Shimamura as a story something truly unique. So, I mentioned earlier that Adachi decided she can't do relationships of any kind, and you might be thinking, well, that sounds like a terrible protagonist for a romance story. And oh gosh, you have no idea. Adachi is a total disaster of a human being. And just to drive that point home quite clearly, I want to read this particular quote from Volume 5. Besides Shimamura, the current me had nothing. I was empty. Were you to peel back my skin, you'd find not flesh and bones, but her, Shimamura. And yet, I felt like I might start tearing my hair out soon. Simply allowing my mind to wander caused my eyes to grow wet with tears. The fantasies I'd indulged in were not based on anything. I knew that. Even so, was it really that wrong, wanting to be rewarded? Wanting your efforts to pay off? To be quite exact, this particular bit of text is from the fan translation of Adachi and Shimamura Volume 5. I do not know what the original Japanese says. I do not know what emotional connotation the original Japanese carries. The official translation from Seven Seas, meanwhile, rather says, outside of Shimamura, I had nothing. Cut me open, and I would bleed Shimamura. So how could she do this to me? Every time I let my guard down, tears welled in my eyes. I knew my feelings were one-sided, and yet, was it so wrong to want her to return them? The official translation is quick, concise, sharp. It cuts thick, as it says, like the slashing of a knife across skin, exposing Adachi's feelings beneath. In this version, Adachi hardly lingers on this emotion. Her mind races. Her thoughts tear through her. But in the fan translation, this feeling is mulled over, gradually peeled away as it says, revealed slowly with intense deliberation. The chapter from which this comes, Shimamura's Sword, or Shimamura's Blade in the Seven Seas translation, is perhaps the most psychological chapter contained within the entire series. It is a chapter that, knowing Adachi, you know is coming from the very first few pages when this illustration of one of the upcoming chapters is shown. It is Shimamura and Tarumi, her childhood friend who has tried to rekindle their connection after years apart, and Adachi working a food stand, watching as Shimamura goes out with a girl who she doesn't know, a girl who isn't her. We knew this was coming from this very moment, and yet it still smacked, it hurt when we got to this chapter. Adachi pondering, stewing in this jealousy after days of depression as her mental state reaches a boiling point before erupting straight into the receiver of her cell phone in the form of her screaming, crying voice transmitted straight to Shimamura's ears. Our pulse had steadily begun to quicken as we read this on our own cell phone, our heart in step with Adachi as she began to speak these words, and we stopped reading, almost too afraid to turn the page. We did eventually go back to it, of course. It was not too long after that I realized why this chapter had tripped us up like it did. We saw ourselves in this. No, it's quite accurate to say that we were worse than this. We, too, when we were Adachi's age, had a crush who saw us as a friend, to whom we had limited access. We, too, grew depressed and jealous and angry at being away from them, as a result of us having few other friends and no one else particularly on our mind or in our social life. We, too, were bitter about our negative home life. But we didn't stop at where Adachi stopped, at airing our grievances, at assaulting our crush with our undue anger. No, we made a specific threat. I won't be repeating that here, but needless to say, we never followed up on it. It's been nearly a decade since then, and we haven't ever not regretted it whenever that memory resurfaces. Well, the things we set up to that point, the emotions we aired, may have been not quite as bad as the things Adachi says here. The threat kind of compensated for that. I'd say, in the end, we were just about as bad as Adachi at her age. We were not ready for a romantic relationship with anyone at that age. We probably still aren't, and personally, I don't want one. I have doubts that it'll ever go well. My headmates feel different, but they're not talking right now, so anyway. Shimamura is annoyed, doesn't even follow what the fuck Adachi is on about, hangs up, and Adachi thinks she's thrown away their friendship. But then she works up the courage to call Shimamura again, or perhaps more accurately, lacks the emotional maturity to let it go, and they reconcile, although, weirdly, Shimamura doesn't seem bothered. And then, although Shimamura tries to get Adachi to make more friends, it doesn't really work. One of the most "fuck you, I'm autistic and I don't care who knows it" scenes ever happens. And then the next volume, Adachi tearfully confesses to Shimamura for a second time, after a first time blundering it and passing out while gripping her close in the bath while they're both wearing swimsuits. Gosh, that's also the most fucking hilariously cringe scene. Just imagine how embarrassing it must be to pass out from telling your crush how you feel about them. And then Shimamura accepts Adachi's feelings, and then they are officially girlfriends. And the whole time I was reading this, the whole damn time, I could not stop thinking. I can fucking see it. The think pieces, the ones going. How Adachi and Shimamura exploits queer teenage girls by depicting queer teenage girls realistically. the Twitter threads going. Is Shimamura right for not taking Adachi's shit right then, or was she being an asshole instead of, it being revealed that her patience has limits, but also she later feels like maybe she was a bit too cold and made a mistake? Or like, the inevitable, is Adachi a yandere takes, or a womanizer, or a dangerous, abusive, codependent manipulator? Were the arcs of volumes 4 through 8 to be adapted to a second season of anime, there'd be plenty of fuel for opportunistic media criticism weirdos such as ourselves to say, is Adachi and Shimamura problematic? And, no, it's not. It's dramatic. This is a psychological romantic drama about a deeply emotional, neurodivergent teenage girl who has human flaws. Like, yes, Adachi is jealous and controlling and even a bit mean, and she knows this. And we've seen these articles and Twitter threads about Adashima, about Yagakimi, about other queer media in general floating around that are just like, is this lesbian relationship between two mentally ill teenagers dangerously codependent or abusive? We sometimes even floated around to that idea ourselves, reading all the Yuri stuff we read. We read a lot of Yuri stuff, and a lot of the time the answer is just, yeah, maybe. Is that wrong? Is it wrong to depict these things as part of a normal story with stakes and drama? Don't these people need to have issues in order for the story to have somewhere it can move up from? There seems to be a subset of the queer leftish internet and hell, pop culture, media criticism, internet in general that just doesn't want things to happen in narratives. And like, Joyce had this sort of phase herself in reaction to her breakup last year, where she wanted to believe that the fact that she was a fan of Love Live was the problem. The fact that Love Live occasionally features shots of teenage girls' legs, that would have been the issue, not that she has a difficult personality or overinflated expectations of her partners. She just stopped reading Yuri for a while because she just thought, maybe the fact that I was reading Yuri stories that pretend those issues don't exist, maybe that's the problem. Maybe the fact that these stories have male gaze because they're targeted at men is the problem. Maybe I'm actually a man is the problem. And this is all just bullshit. This is all just self-directed homophobia as an excuse for happening to be a bit of a fucked up person who is queer. And that's really all that is. People don't criticize straight romance stories for characters having realistic relationship issues. People don't even criticize straight romance stories for being exploitative or fucked up or weird or anything. Well, some people do, but, no chance the average online anime fan would be having such takes on, Origairu. But even the most, reasoned takes on Yagakimi from very smart people online have to acknowledge, oh yeah, some of these characters check off all the boxes for the predatory lesbian trope. That sentence says everything, doesn't it? There is a predatory lesbian trope. Is there a predatory heterosexual trope? Is there heterosexual shipping bait? We sure could pretend there is one as a bit, but no, the answer's no. And yes, the depictions of queers as uniquely, specifically unhinged and dangerous by straight people is a thing that is a thing because of queerphobia itself, and maybe it makes us look good or better somehow to paint ourselves as not having awful personalities or issues with relationships so that bigots have less rhetorical ammo against us. But somehow, the more I think about all this, the more I think that maybe the predatory gay tropes in straight media aren't just straightforwardly to make queer people look bad, but to make us afraid of ourselves, and to make us afraid of art that depicts us as human beings and not just soft uwu girls. Maybe the reason was to make us afraid of Adachi. Anyway, I'm just gonna say it. There is no problematic media. Fictional, and especially animated or drawn media, cannot be declared immoral simply on the basis of what it chooses to depict, and it's high time we stopped deluding ourselves into thinking it can be. And I know this is all very much an extremely online discourse, and most normal people offline don't tend to think of media quite that way. It still pisses us off, you know? It pisses us off that this stupid problematism bullshit around fictional media has brain poisoned for like half a fucking decade. So we're really rather ticked off by that. That's not the point of this essay. Maybe it'll be the point of another one. So yeah, to sum it up, a lot of Yuri things that the average concentration of Yuri fans like tend to be free of too much conflict, and quick to gay, and Adachi and Shimamura fulfills the former requirement most of the time, at least and especially in all the material adapted by the first season. Past Volume 4, though, things start getting more intense because, well, Adachi first of all, Adachi is a whole person. Tarumi is also a whole person, although we don't get to see too much of her. It seems pretty clear she's going through her own general turmoil away from the center of the story, and yeah, Yashiro also. What the hell is with her? Well, it turns out she actually is an alien, or at the very least, her being an alien is a much more plausible explanation than anything else. We'll get to her in a bit, maybe. The relationship happens, with Adachi and Shimamura being girlfriends, and that's just adorable the way that works out. Shimamura isn't 100% certain she loves Adachi, but she doesn't dislike Adachi. She's certainly not indifferent to Adachi, and she's open to trying Adachi out, so she accepts. Adachi is at first her usual possessive self, taking this license to be even more aggressive about not wanting Shimamura to speak to or even look at any other girls in the world. Adachi's literally never had any other relationships, not even with her own mother, so that just makes sense. She thinks of being together as special itself, which prompts Shimamura to try to think of ways to raise Adachi's bar for things being special by such things as making Adachi lunch, kissing Adachi's forehead, and that's where that stays for a little while. The third base of Lesbian. Homemade lunches and forehead kissing. And that's all really cool and satisfying, because there's not a lot of Yuri stories, hell, not a lot of romance stories, period, that actually depict the work of the relationship. Most Yuri just rush to have girls kissing, and that's that. It's a lot of casual fluff with not a lot of particular focus on how the relationship develops or anything. In devoting her time to doting on Adachi, Shimamura neglects Tarumi, and the distance between them widens again. She one night thinks in a dream, ominously, that Adachi, in her quest to have Shimamura all to herself, has ruined Shimamura's relationships. But Shimamura's not sure that bothers her, and Adachi continues to have her personality issues, but she and Shimamura are both happy for now, and so not too much active drama ensues. Just anxiety, just tension, just slow development. And this continues through volumes 7 and 8, but Yuruma makes a very interesting creative choice to capture the totality of the narrative. Starting in volume 5, certain alternate contexts for the beginning of Adachi and Shimamura's relationship are depicted. In the first chapter of that volume, Adachi and Shimamura first meet as small children in preschool, during which Yashiro introduces the basic concept of an alternate timeline to us readers. Then in volume 7, we get vignettes where Adachi doesn't decide to close the distance between herself and Shimamura, and instead continues hiding on the second floor of the gym, where Adachi and Shimamura never meet in high school and instead find each other as adults, where Adachi and Shimamura encounter each other at the end of the world, world, where Shimamura is an alien, or perhaps I should more accurately say a foreigner from space, whose language Adachi spends years learning just so that they can talk. And all of this is written from the perspective of Adachi and Shimamura, feeling as if this is random chance, a simple coincidence, luck of the draw, the one twist of fate that changed their lives forever. But then in Volume 8, Iruma skips ahead a decade. Adachi and Shimamura are now living together, both 27 years old. Is Adachi still clingy and jealous? Less so, apparently, but it's not explored fully. How are Hino and Nagafuji? I'm just realizing I've barely, if at all, mentioned them in this entire essay. How's Tarumi? Is she okay? I don't know. But regardless, adult Shimamura goes and says hello to Yashiro, the small child-shaped alien who's taken up an unofficial position as the Shimamura family pet. And Yashiro says something very interesting. Shimamura and Adachi meeting is not chance whatsoever. It is in fact destiny. According to Yashiro, anyway. In every timeline and reality, she says, they are fated to encounter each other. Not because they're special, not because the universe is eyeing them closely or anything, but simply because they are. Because apparently, reality likes being consistent, or perhaps finds it too exhausting to get particularly creative. Adachi and Shimamura just meet each other because the code for reality gets copy-pasted, or something. Yashiro has no answer for this particularly, other than that it just is, and she doesn't seem bothered by it. Shimamura doesn't think too much of it either, and then she and Adachi go off on their overseas vacation and reminisce as a framing device for the rest of the novel, which is about the school trip they went on in their second year, and about how Adachi is horny but doesn't know what the hell to do with that, and about their classmates who are grouped up with them for the trip, noticing that they're a same-gender couple, and surprisingly supporting them. At least one of them does. Well, it was surprising to us, and surprising to Shimamura, who expresses in her internal monologue that she was afraid of facing a much less nice reaction after Adachi, in her lack of care for how she is seen by others, basically outed them. But it's also not that surprising, because in the Reiwa era of the Yuri genre, it's pretty normal for there to be more straightforward acceptance of homosexuality and less just a phase framing that there is. This is a thing that our friend, student of Ethereum, went into in a Tumblr post, well, volunteered to go into it rather, after they mentioned this fact to us and I told them that I was writing this. Also, they take credit for coining the term Reiwa-era Yuri, so if there's another term, I guess someone might tell us. But otherwise, we're just gonna continue using this one. So, the school trip happens. Things happen on the school trip, and the whole time Shimamura is wondering, do I really love Adachi? Is this relationship going to go okay? Will we have a future together? And when her classmate asks her these things, she just doesn't really know. And then, in a twist of an ending to the 8th volume that feels custom fucking made for the hypothetical second season of the anime to end here, Shimamura has an epiphany. As she's stumbling through the fog that's emerged around their school trip bus, she realizes that she's looking through the fog for Adachi, because Shimamura really does love Adachi, really does care about Adachi, wants to live with Adachi, and they find each other and meet each other's eyes, and it's just this entire love magic cinema moment. And then that night they sleep together. By which I mean, they just sleep. The idea that one or both of them want to have sex is floated, but neither of them are emotionally ready for that. So they just lay down, they chat about how their future is going to go, how they want to one day go even farther than there. And the last chapter cuts ahead to them in the future, again, going home from their overseas trip, from whence they've gone farther. And it's just like, neat. Most Yuri, most romance stories, just kind of end at, they dated, they kissed, they're together now, the end. Even Bloom Into You, a romance story that we like so much that you, Koito, literally infected our brain, just gets its two leads together, has them fuck, has an epilogue going, oh yeah, so they got married, they're fine now. And it's not out of a lack of care or consideration or laziness or anything that so many romance stories end this way. It's It's more that human relationships are kind of metal as fuck. So metal, in fact, that they take years and years and are fickle as hell, and no matter how much work you put into them, they will constantly collapse under the slightest pressure, like a run of your favorite roguelike, or some kind of massive, long-term Jenga tower of social pressures and favors and feelings that you just cannot stabilize. And this is something that Shimamura and Adachi are both very conscious of, that Tarumi is conscious of when she encounters Shimamura again after all those years, that everyone in the story is painfully aware of. Human relationships are not built to last. Especially not in a world like this, in an economic system like capitalism that's seemingly hell-bent at tearing us all away from each other at every turn. Dealing with all that is hard to do within the framework of a traditional narrative, so a lot of romance stories do end with the couple getting together, because that's economical. It's easy. It's satisfying. You don't need to think about it too hard. Don't need to think about how most relationships just kind of fizzle out and fade and everything. And Adashima ponders the fragility of relationships so much more than most other romance fiction we've read. And it takes the time to try and make its relationship between its leads special, to make it believable that this will last. The fact that Iruma puts so much time and thought and effort into this relationship and its development and strengthening makes it come across, in context, as just a little bit off when the story just skips the rest of itself. The reveal that Adachi and Shimamura are literally bound by fate is not handled as cheaply as you might think, or really cheaply at all. It doesn't ruin the story. Shimamura doesn't really have any regard for it. She's just like, well, our relationship happened and it's fine regardless. I don't need to understand all that fate stuff. And it's good. It's working out. But I still have so many questions. Adachi's personality, Shimamura's devotion. Is she devoted? I don't know. She doesn't seem devoted. So how's that working out? How's it going to work out if and when Adachi asks for something that Shimamura can't or won't give? And then that's the point at which the relationship is truly strained. Tarumi, do they stay friends? Will Adachi ever meet Tarumi? Will Tarumi be upset that someone else likes Shimamura? How's Shimamura gonna take all that? And everything else. How are their parents going to take it? It seems that it's fine in the future, but was there drama? Was there difficulty? Or did they just not care that much? I don't know. On the one hand, it's nice to see the future stuff more. It's nice to see a more thorough exploration of an adult couple's life in a Yuri story than we've previously really gotten. We all want that sequel to Bloom Into You, because it'd be nice to capture that experience in an art piece. But the way it's paced, well, feels disappointing because I don't really like the way that it kind of arbitrarily makes the story end before it keeps going. And also, I can't really criticize it for that because, well, I can't think of a particularly better solution. I know we all want answers to these questions. We all want to see more of this, and Iruma would probably like to write more of it, but they have other things they want to write and unfortunately aren't immortal. In the 8th of Iruma's afterwords, which consistently fail to convince us that they are not writing their autobiography here, it is explained that Volume 8's flash forward to the future is the ending, or at least unending. You could say a contingency, so that if Iruma stops writing the novels prematurely, then there will have been an ending. There's currently 11 total volumes, and there's going to be
もう一つ
or so says Iruma, with the 11th one having come out while we were working on this essay. So yeah, that's the reason why this feels so weird, so much like a forced ending to the series at the expense of the larger plot's pacing. Because this one person can't spend their entire life writing the life of a fictional cast of characters. And that's just the tragedy of our finite lives, isn't it? That we can't spend all our lives chilling out, eating food, and making art. Hopefully one day someone will have that figured out. But in the meantime, reading this and considering both the conclusive way with which Volume 8 ended, as well as the fact that there was a change of illustrators starting with Volume 9, and the thought that this would be the ending of the hypothetical second season of the anime, which is our own original thought, I should clarify, we decided it'd make the most sense to treat it as a clean break in the story, and read Volume 9 later, after reading the anime special novel, which is also quite interesting for some different reasons.
Hello, this is Audrey. Happy New Year. Are you enjoying the video? Our first 2023 video, and hopefully not our last. How is it? Are you enjoying the pretty lights, the wide vocabulary and elegant rhythm of these particularly crafted sentences, the dulcet tones of my voice, the intelligent takes I have on a piece of media you've never heard of, my choices of music from our mile-long playlist of independent queer musicians and anime and video game soundtracks? Are you simply enjoying the feeling of watching a new joyce-stick YouTube video essay? I hope you are enjoying something, and that I am still able to offer it. I don't know if anyone has noticed, but we only have one corpse. Making these videos takes so much time and energy, and we only have the one body and brain to do it with. This brain is 1 year older, and about 8 people fuller for it. We've had a difficult year, as our motivation and output and support, both monetarily and personally, has decreased, and the world has continued to disappoint us by already being at rock bottom and getting worse. Who knows how long this will be able to continue? Who knows if people care enough? We haven't been working hard enough. I feel kind of ashamed of that, and I know people are going to tell me I shouldn't be, but I do. I've been taking point on our life since April, and I've been barely able to manage anything more than what Joyce did. I haven't been working hard enough to keep things consistent, to keep us afloat, to make the best of what we have. Still, we have about 37 people who keep donating to us on Patreon, and it's enough for us to buy food at least, so we're buying food and still making videos, I think. I don't want to disappoint anyone who's spending money on us. The continued support has been invaluable and very appreciated, especially since I know we haven't been doing all the best at delivering, and it's not easy for anyone. And no one's obligated to help us, but it'd really mean a lot if any more of y'all would care to help out. If you have the means, and want to see more long videos like this discussing an entire series of queer fiction like this, then please consider donating to us on Patreon or on Ko-fi using the links in the descriptions and the comments. So yeah, and thanks to everyone who already is helping out, which at this moment includes Bree, Dorian Newland, Hikari no Yume, Ella Tantavi, Pigeon, Sally, Scimitar, and Tiss, and others whose names are on screen right now. The other day, power went out here because of a very large windstorm that swept across the north of the west coast, including Oregon, after the winter storm that already kind of fucked a lot just everywhere, so we lost a day of video editing to that. Who knows how long it'll be before one of those just completely blows out all the infrastructure and makes this work untenable. But in the meantime, we're making the best of it. This video needed to come out by New Year's Eve, no matter what, so here it is. Although the next parts of the video are even less completely edited than I expected they'd be. And if you're looking for someone to blame for that, blame God, blame capitalism. Blame everything we can't do anything about. I'm going to talk about the weird sci-fi-ish parts of Adachi and Shimamura now. I hope you enjoy the talk.
Just in case you've never heard of this before, I probably need to explain what the hell it is. So, when Adachi and Shimamura, the anime, got a Blu-ray release, the publishers wanted to include some incentives for buying the thing, even if you'd already seen the anime on TV or whatever, as they do. As such, they asked Iruma to write them something to include as a bonus. And so, 4 new light novel chapter-sized pieces of writing from Iruma were distributed in the first runs of each of the 4 Blu-ray volumes. And these stories, which otherwise have seen no official release, got translated into English by the same people doing the fan translations of the main novels. So, it might be more accurate, technically, to describe these as 4 different, discrete novels, but that's a huge linguistic nuisance. It's 4 chapters, that's only about a chapter or 2 smaller than the average light novel, so I'm just gonna describe it as a 4-chapter novel, because it basically is one. Anyway, the anime special novel is about Yashiro, and how she is an immortal cat. Did I already explain who Yashiro is? I don't know. Anyway, Yashiro is best explained as an alien and corollary to Shinobu Oshino, anime's other mildly famous non-human immortal child, who one day waltzes into town and sweet-talks all the humans into giving her food, and we say, "Wait, an alien? Really?" While the anime provides no real answer, the novels eventually get around to clarifying. Yes, an alien. Really? Yashiro is most definitely not a human, and not a documented Earth species, so she's probably an alien. Her pockets are bigger on the inside. She can read minds. She barely ages, if at all, after 10, 70, and then thousands of years. She can apparently time and space travel all by her lonesome. She loves humans, and apparently favors spending time with them far more than her own species, who she is ignoring. She can fold to comfortably fit into spaces smaller than herself. Therefore, Yashiro is indisputably a Time Lord.
You haven't been trying to play this, have you?
What an interesting sound!
Or Time Lady, Time Maiden, whatever. Taken in context, the most questionable claim Yashiro makes is that she is 680 years old. It is later shown that she is terrible at keeping track of the time, so much so that later she views the difference in time between 3,000 years or 30,000 as something trivial, that it doesn't matter if she flubs up a bit. She's just like that. Yashiro is an extremely interesting character who, very curiously, perceives herself as the least interesting thing in the entire world. She claims to have come to Earth for a rendezvous with her fellow aliens, but she never treats this task with any degree of urgency. While she's never specific about the details of this plan, my guess is that she, like Adachi and Shimamura, only decided she wanted a piece of their slice of life because she was playing hooky, like Adachi and Shimamura. At least, that's how I prefer to think of it. The idea has thematic resonance, so as far as I'm concerned, that's canon. But the other thing is that, unlike Adachi, Shimamura, and basically every other human in this story, Yashiro has only one emotion. She is happy all the time. Yashiro is never bothered by anything whatsoever. She always has what she wants. She's never bothered by not getting what she wants. If she doesn't make her goal, she moves the goalpost. Yashiro does not seem to have any worldly concerns whatsoever. She eats all the time, not out of an apparent need to sate hunger, but rather for the simple pleasure of doing so. She doesn't face much opposition either. She's such a cute child that everyone just wants to pet and feed and pamper her, and Shimamura's family takes no issue with her just chilling at their house for 10 10 years. The only thing Yashiro is ever described as not liking is baths, and even then, she's never really angry about being made to take one. In her internal monologue, Shimamura consistently describes Yashiro as being like a cat. And she really is, isn't she? She eats and sleeps all day, she doesn't like water, and she is happily accepted as a freeloader for years in the homes of human strangers. And that's just normal, even though Yashiro is, well, humanoid, at the very least. But the bizarre factor of Yashiro's character is increased exponentially when Iruma takes her out of Adachi and Shimamura and plops her right into Girl's Last Tour. Girl's Last Tour, if you aren't aware, is an anime about girls on their last tour. It's a survival Kirara, where moe blobs have a picnic in a dying world full of remnants of a fallen civilization. It's all moody and pensive and about small girls who do not seem particularly bothered by the inevitability of their death. One of them is in Devor. Relevant here is that one of these two moe blobs is named Chito, and coincidentally, the protagonist of the Adachi and Shimamura special novel, who is also touring a dying world full of remnants of a fallen civilization, is also named Chito. Did Iruma do this on purpose? Probably not, but there's an excuse to recommend Girl's Last Tour without needing to make a video about it. Go watch it. Probably go read it, too. We haven't read it, but it's probably really good, both forms. It's great. Anyway, Chito number 2 is also hanging around Yashiro on another planet. Not Earth, which we've never seen before, but that at some point was colonized by Chito's ancestors, but then it turned out that the planet sucked at sustaining crops, and so everyone fell ill and or starved, and unfortunately died. Which sucks. So Chito is just wandering this basically dead civilization, where she could be the last human alive for all she knows, but not really caring much. Yashiro is here, accompanying Chito and chatting her up because she finds it fun, I guess. She doesn't really seem to care very much about the humanity dead thing, even more so than Chito, but she's very eager to tell Chito this one story she has about these two very nice girls who gave her a lot of snacks to eat some thousands of years prior. Yashiro tells 4 separate stories to Chito, which are each set at different points in Adachi and Shimamura's adult lives together. All typical things, really. Going shopping, going on onsen dates, kissing. Well, no, they don't directly kiss, but Shimamura does reminisce about their first bloody kiss. And also, Shimamura dying. Yes, Yashiro confirms in canon that Adachi and Shimamura died. But she's not particularly bothered by it. She's just as cheery as ever. It's not like she's happy about them being dead, but she's not especially sad either. No more troubled than she'd be if Shimamura refused to give her candy. And common sense, common familiarity with narrative tropes about immortal people says this should be existentially terrifying to her. Or existentially terrifying to us. A living creature that is only ever happy, that never dies or grows old or grieves. This is the basic setup for some Lovecraftian horror story or another, or several, isn't it? And it is, on a basic level, kind of unsettling to see Yashiro just not being bothered by living thousands of years, by the people around her dying, and her just remaining a child forever, but it's not really, is it? Look at her. She's too cute to be scared of. She's a human-shaped cat. Isn't it adorable? Humans typically live longer than cats. I know. But if a cat lived longer than humans, do you think it would give a fuck? One of the most interesting parts of Adachi and Shimamura is the middle part of Volume 6, where, as I think I've already said, it's revealed that up till now, the love of little Hogetsu Shimamura's life has been not a girl, not even a human, but the other Shimamura family pet, the dog that lives at her grandparents' house, Gon. Gon was Hogetsu's best friend, Hogetsu's only true friend, the only living creature she ever loved, and for a time, the only reason Hogetsu wanted to come back. And now it's only just now that Shimamura is really realizing just how strange this is, that though she's come to accept that she's really rather strange, that she doesn't particularly care. And now she's coming back for the yearly Oban visit to her grandparents' house, to see Gon for what is probably the last time. This dog, who was once young and spry, once literally quite bounced up and down at the sight of little Hogetsu, has now grown old and frail, barely able to walk. This dog, who Shimamura loves more than her own mother, is dying, and Shimamura finds this prospect... what's the word? Disquieting, perhaps? Disquieting. Shimamura is disquiet, with thoughts of age, thoughts of love, thoughts of death, as she still finds herself puzzled over what Adachi's feelings are, what Adachi wants out of her, knowing what Adachi wants, but not really able to admit it to herself, wondering about her own life, about if she'll have companions in her future, about if it'll suck, and if it just... Shimamura thinks about a lot, and I don't have words for a lot of it. The main thing I remember is her speaking to the odd old man who's her grandparents' next door neighbor, and it just being, firstly, really funny, because he is just walking around with a teacup that his granddaughter made and bragging about how great of a potter she is. Just because he can. Just because he's a weird old guy, and people will let weird old people get away with things, and he can, and more power to him. And he gives Shimamura a fishing rod as such, so he says, because he can. Yeah, so, just to repeat what I said. Weird old dude on a family trip meets Shimamura, says, "Hey, my daughter's real damn good at pottery, and that's why I'm toting her special teacup around. How about you go fishing with this fishing rod?" Refuses to elaborate further. Leaves. That's just great. Well, he does elaborate a little further before he leaves. He says she should enjoy her childhood while she can, then gives her some fishing advice, I guess. That's all very nice of him. And then Gon shows up, walking all slow like he does, and Shimamura asks the old man, "Is it tough growing old?" His answer wasn't going to affect anything. Things were going to continue the same way as they always had. And yet, despite all that, he just couldn't help but ask. Mumbling to himself, the man shook his head slightly. His turban shook as well.
"I see. So, your questions too have a hint of philosophy to them, huh? I guess that it really makes sense, given your name and all."
What's that even supposed to mean?
I hadn't meant to grumble that out loud. No, it was simply my instinctual reaction to the situation. If I had to call anything here philosophical, it would be his needlessly obtuse answer.
It's not tough for me, no. Why? Well, I got this teacup from my granddaughter. That's why. Does that answer your question?
You could see the man's eyes sparkle as he said that. I guess. It really didn't. Apparently I'd picked the wrong person to ask. And that's just sort of mellow and funny and surprisingly sage. Well, maybe not that surprising. I don't know. It's just an entire moment. It's also a little surprising, just a teensy little bit, because, like, this is a Kurara, isn't it? This kind of story doesn't usually go there. Like, according to Iruma, the editor's prompt that resulted in Adashima was write something like Yuri, and Yuri is a stupid and silly nonsense comedy about immortal lesbians violently assaulting each other, both physically and sexually, which is really funny, because they're literally a bunch of gay Looney Tunes. Or maybe that's just the anime, I don't know. I guess the manga might be different, but even still, the manga's never aged these characters a single day, as far as I can see. Really the only Kurara that I know of that addresses the fact of the cute girls eventually dying, other than Girls' Last Tour, is School Live. But, like, that's an edgy one, isn't it? It's literally set in a zombie apocalypse. It's not exactly subtle. You don't really want to think about, say, the Kaons getting older and dying, do you? I mean, maybe you do. If you do, you're probably a little weird, and that's fine. So, like, this is just kind of, I don't want to say weird, because in the context of the story, it isn't. But I'm quite sure that people who've only seen the first season of the anime aren't really expecting this, you know? It's certainly a place to have gone and be going. It's so comical, so caustic, so casually morbid. to see the cast of Adachi and Shimamura reflect on their life, their future, their love, and their relationships, and their families, and drifting apart from their friends and peers as the rivers of life all take them the different places they're going to towards their eventual death, and all these very difficult human things to be thinking about. And Yashiro just is happily prancing around eating donuts. But also, it's not that weird, really. Although Yashiro is so transfixingly childlike as she is, she's also so pure and straightforward and earnest as any sentient creature can plausibly get. Although she doesn't share in the complicated feelings of the humans around her, she's never unsympathetic to their emotions and to their needs. She's always happy and childish, but she never forces that on people. She just accepts people as they are, and she does her best to do right by people. Which is unsettling, not because it's undesirable, exactly, but rather because it's impossible. But if it were possible, and hey, maybe it is possible for a non-human Yashiro to be emotionally stable and pleasant and good, but it's not possible for us humans all the time to be that way, just the same as it's not possible to live on, immortal and ageless as Yashiro does. I guess the conclusion that I just came to is that Yashiro is the part that's like Yuri. Yashiro is the immortal gay Looney Tune, but given new meaning by being placed in a world full of actual people dealing with gross human problems like jealousy and unfulfilled desires for affection and burgeoning sexuality and age and work and family and death. And Yashiro is just great. She's a great child and a great cat. Like, probably the best cat. Okay, and now I have to explain why she's the best cat. So, the last story. In the second chapter of the anime special novel, Chito and Yashiro run into another girl. A girl named Shima, described as having black hair and feeling like Chito already knows her. And then you turn the page and there's the Adachi chibi. There it is. There's Adachi, and they keep exploring the desolate, deserted planet. And then in the fourth and final chapter, Shimamura dies. The story that Yashiro has to tell is about Shimamura, and told to us from the point of view of Hogetsu Shimamura, age 85-ish, who describes her relationship dynamic with Yashiro as having gone from little sister to daughter to grandchild on account of Yashiro still not having aged a single day after all these years. And up till this point, knowing that Shimamura was already dead in the future, I'd been thinking, oh gosh, oh fuck, it's gonna absolutely suck if Shimamura dies first and then Adachi is all alone and miserably depressed for the rest of her life. And thankfully, that doesn't happen. No, it's Shimamura who is all alone, and literally everybody else who is dead. Adachi, Hino, Nagafuji, Tarumi, Shimamura's little sister, everyone she knew is dead now. And Shimamura, too, is also dying of old age. Shimamura thinks she might be seeing Adachi's ghost because she's evidently gone and interdicted Adachi after Adachi's death, but she's also not quite sure about that whatsoever, and she's just tired and lonely and reflecting on all her life up to this point and how fondly she remembers her high school years with Adachi. And her only other thought is, damn, all my friends are dead and being old is boring. To relieve her boredom, Shimamura takes her sister's game console, which no longer works with modern TVs because it's the future, so she goes out to an electronics store and gets an adapter. Also, because it's the future, there's been alien visitations and humanity is looking into space traveling more, but Shimamura's been born too soon to be a part of that, or to care. So, she goes back to her home, boots up a JPEG on her sister's old game console, and makes a party of characters, which she names after Adachi, Hino, Nagafuji, Tarumi, and her sister, and then finds out that video games are good. So Shimamura decides that her life's goal for the rest of her life is going to be to finish Dragon Quest. Does she finish it? Who knows, no idea, the story ends. But before Shimamura dies, she asks Yashiro, her immortal alien child house cat, if she will ever see Adachi again. Yashiro says yes, she will, for it is destiny. And Shimamura's dying request of Yashiro is for Yashiro to make absolutely sure that every Shimamura across the universe finds their Adachi. Yashiro promises, earnestly. And thus, here, in the present of the future, of the end, of humanity, in a dying civilization, Yashiro looks at the two last known living humans on this particular planet, says, "My job here is done," and then, shortly thereafter, fucks off, assured in the knowledge that she's fulfilled her promise to Shimamura to play matchmaker for her most recent reincarnation and her destined wifey. So yeah, that's just what happens. It might be just about a wrap on humanity, or at least this particular humanity, but the lesbians of all time are still gay. There are several things about this particular chapter. One, it's unintentionally a particularly stark distillation of the classical American millennial/zoomer fantasy of having the economic security to retire at an appropriate age and spend the last years of your life in dignity after a good life of living well with a good partner who you were happy with, or multiple or no partners if that's your preference, and then dying peacefully of old age playing video games. Yeah, oof. 2. It's a particularly stark distillation of the perhaps not as common but particularly appealing fantasy of being assured that you and your partner will reincarnate and get together again by your cat, who promises to make extra sure that that comes to pass all throughout every time and place and timeline, because your cat likes you and is a Time Lord. Yashiro is good. And 3, yeah, it'd be really nice to know that you're gonna reincarnate with your soulmate. That's just convenient. For some people, I'm sure. Okay, so, do I have anything to say about this story? Yeah, I probably do. Probably a lot, but I don't know if I can coherently say very much of it without repeating a lot of what I already said. It's melancholy as all hell, and it's also just not something I expected at all from this series when we started reading it. Iruma even reflects on that fact directly in their afterword, saying, anyway, yeah, that's the sort of story this became. Death approaches. I guess it does. I guess it does. There's a lot else I feel I have to comment on. If I had infinite time, I'd also add on analyses and comparisons of the 2 Adachi and Shimamura manga adaptations. I'd read volumes 9 and 10 before finishing this video and talk about my feelings on however Tarumi's arc gets resolved, if it gets resolved. I barely even began to discuss or analyze Hino and Nagafuji's relationship and their additional flavoring of the story as a side couple. Did my tangent on Adachi's jealousy really go anywhere? Did I have an answer? I don't know. Probably not, but the volumes that I read up to didn't really have an answer either. Do I want to try and pretentiously psychoanalyze Iruma and his writing based on the incomplete information I have from these English translations? There's also another series, Iruma's apparent debut series, where a girl and a boy who fall in love have childhood trauma about being kidnapped a long time ago and are being re-traumatized by a serial killing incident in a small town, and that has some hell attacks on the site it's listed at. Does this psychological horror crime fiction have some connection to Adachi sometimes thinking a teensy bit like a serial killer? Is the electric child and ground control to psychoelectric girl another thing I haven't watched nor read? A proto-Yashiro? Is Yashiro really a corollary to Shinobu? Did the Psyche Sayaka novels contain secret Adashima foreshadowing? Did Iruma say something super interesting in an interview somewhere that someone translated on Twitter maybe? Can I get answers to any of these questions without knowing how to speak Japanese? Are we just going to have to learn Japanese and read all the rest of the things Iruma has written ourselves? And this has now just about broken 10,000 words, and I cannot answer any of these questions just yet. So, much like Iruma and Adashima Volume 8, I'm going to arbitrarily force an ending to my unfinished work, despite these loose ends, and hope it's good enough in case we never get around to writing a sequel. In lieu of better wrap-up, I guess I can just say, and as such, anime girls can die too.
You aren't angry or anything, of course. This was all your fault for trusting a demon not to devour you on sight. This is your punishment for questioning fate. You guess. Bit by bit, you are swallowed by the demon until you are no more.
Yes! The